Welcome to Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Shipp, and I'm excited to be sharing with you my life with a son on the spectrum. This podcast is for anyone who is looking for quick tips and perspective, but most of all, for hope and inspiration. So sit back, relax, and let's put the pieces together. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Shipp. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to continue our conversation from last week. So if you did not get a chance to tune into us talking about CBD facts, part 1 in our series with guest speaker Rachael Woosley, please feel free to go back in and listen to that episode. Very insightful, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to carry on this conversation on to part 2 today. So Rachael, thanks again for being here. Appreciate it. So excited to have you here on the show today. As I mentioned in part 1, we have known each other for years, and we've had so many conversations collaborating and also even talking about this topic, CBD, because of Rachael's extensive history that she does have. She has been very key in our lives in terms of helping us and as a family and with my son and incorporating CBD with Drayson. It's been hugely beneficial in our family. And even for me, I even joke around about how CBD has probably made me a better wife, mother, friend, everybody in general.
I hear that a lot.
And I've been joking around a lot lately too about how I'm going through the change. I'm so excited for menopause. I've been having hot flashes. So there has been some extra dosing of CBD for me as well recently, just to manage my internal rage is what I like to call it. But anyway, just to continue on our conversation, I know we kind of closed out about some of the misconceptions about CBD. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wanted to get a little bit more into, within the autism realm, some things that we've noticed with Drayson. But again, just to kind of provide that disclaimer, we are not doctors. We are not healthcare providers. I mean, we're retired healthcare providers, but we're not actively practicing. But this is a topic that is very important and it's very new. There's not a lot of research out right now about CBD. So we wanted to kind of debunk some of the myths and also maybe take it upon yourself. Maybe this is going to give you the encouragement that you need to take it upon yourself to learn more about CBD or educate yourself a little bit more about it and see if it might be beneficial for you and your family as well. So let's talk a little bit about, I wanted to get into kind of some of the sensory issues that I've had with Drayson over the years. And one thing that I've noticed the last couple months since this is, like I said, round 2 of us trying CBD, that it has helped Drayson. I've noticed some of his tics, if you will, his stemming has lessened and helped calm him a little bit. So my question is, do you find that CBD can help with overstimulation or understimulation? Have you noticed a difference between using CBD?
Most people, it's overstimulation that I see. I mean, I've had a few people with understimulation, but mostly overstimulation. And it's if you go back to the last episode, we talked a lot about like the endocannabinoid system. And so I'm not going to reiterate that, but what you're seeing is that homeostasis coming into play. And so when your nervous system is affected, it's throwing off everything else. Mm-hmm. And so, in autism, when other like epilepsy and things like that, where the nervous system, or anxiety, when the nervous system is overstimulated, we're seeing a lot of good results with people saying that they're just noticing that they maybe don't trigger as quickly. Mm-hmm. Maybe with Drayson, you're not seeing as much stimming because he's more relaxed, and his body's just like, hey, I'm a little bit more neutral, calm, and so it's getting more comfortable with itself. So that's what I like with overstimulation. It's a lot of it is people are their bodies are getting more comfortable with itself, and you're able to see, hey, I'm not having these reactions as much, or I'm not having these tics as much in my kids, or I as an adult, like, I may not trigger when my kids upset me quite as quickly, or I don't react the same way. So you're seeing that because you're overstimulated, and that's usually why we react the way that we do, is because our bodies are overstimulated, or they're out of homeostasis. So seeing that result has been, for me at least, as a former researcher, that's really fun, because when you see that consistently, you know that there's something, nutritionally or supplementally, that the cannabinoids are giving the body that is helping enough people to do that. And, in my work with CBD, I see that all the time. And so it's great. When I heard that, I was like, yes.
Yeah. And I do feel like it's kind of fulfilling some sort of deficiency that he has.
Yeah.
But I've noticed, like, less stemming. Sometimes even when he has no socks on, he'll tippy toe walk. Like, he doesn't like the cold sensation of the tile on his feet. But I've even noticed that he's not tiptoe walking as much. He's more flat, walking with flat feet. And we've also noticed that he's speaking more. Which I don't necessarily think that it activated the mechanism of him speaking. I think it calmed him enough to be able to speak. Like, sometimes I think that Drayson gets so anxious that, it inhibits him from doing those things. And, they talk about the overstimulation.
Right.
And so I've noticed that even, we've been working on this goal with our home care team for quite a while now, on just what we call blanket statements, where, we say, oh, I see a tree, or look at that, look at that dog over there, kind of like the statement sentences. And we could never really draw Drayson out doing that. And it's funny, we decided to revisit that goal recently. We reintroduced it, and at the same time, I had kind of started the CBD, and sure enough, like, it almost, like, he's very calm too when he says things like, "Oh, it's raining outside," and so I've noticed even a few things with that, and even also remembering where things are, which is funny, because usually he's like, "I don't know where it is," like, I can't find my blanket, or I can't find my Lego set or whatever. And he would, now it's like, well, where do you think it is?
Right.
And he'll go, and he'll make, like, a statement.
Right.
So we've noticed some more lead-ins with that too. And I'm wondering if it's not so much because it wasn't there, it's just that he's calmer.
Right.
Like, he's less angst.
Right.
And feels like he can.
Right. Well, his body is not having to focus on the stimulation.
Right.
It's focusing on the present moment that he's in, and he's able to process that. And for anybody that has any type of nervous system issues, once their nervous system gets less stimulated, everybody that I've ever met was always like, oh my gosh, I can actually, like, focus on what's here and now. And so that's, it's his body is being able to not have to focus on the stimulation, but focus on what he's doing. So that's completely understandable.
And I feel like it's almost like I call it the princess and the pea syndrome. You're laying on the mattress, and the pea's underneath at the very bottom of the mattress, and that person's so uncomfortable, and they can't really pinpoint what's wrong.
Yeah.
It's kind of, that's the analogy that I feel like it is, because when he's overstimulated like that, it's like he just seems so displaced, like he can't get comfortable.
Right.
And I realize that it's part of how he's processing information.
Right.
And he hasn't stopped doing it completely, but we've just noticed that it's lessened a little bit. And so I wonder if it has quieted that part of him, so that he can actually focus. Do you find that CBD can help some people with focus?
Oh, absolutely. Because what it's doing is exactly what is happening with Drayson. Drayson is that the body's no longer having to focus on the body. It's focusing on what the brain wants to function and do at the moment in time. So, because a lot of times when we're not focused, it's because it's either we're worrying about things, or we're trying to do something in the future that we're not prepared for, something that we've regretted in the past, or that we're thinking that we did wrong. So we're focused in the wrong places. And so when we can quiet that mind in a way to focus more on the mind, not on the body, and focus on what's at hand, then a lot of people say that they have a lot more focus because they can see what's in front of them.
Yeah.
But when you're anxious, you're worried about all the other things outside of what's happening right at that moment. And so to be able to like have that stuff fall away in a manner of speaking, like the peas pulled out from underneath the princess, and then the princess can focus on sleeping instead of the pea, then she can sleep. I mean, it's like kids in a bed, with you, co-sleeping is an amazing thing. But when those kids are out of the bed, then you're kind of like, oh my gosh, I can actually sleep. You know what I'm saying? So that's the same principle. So it's the mind works that same way. So it's, even when I work with like other clients doing other things, sometimes it's the chaos. It's like once you get the chaos out of your mind and you can focus on the one thing, it's like, oh my gosh, I can actually get stuff done. But it's getting the clutter out of there. And so that's what a lot of people are seeing, is they're getting their peas out from underneath their mattress, and they're able to focus on what they need to focus on. And I mean, the peas are still there. It's just not to the magnitude that it was before. It minimizes that. And your brain is able to organize those in a way to go, okay, this is priority now, this is not. And oftentimes when we get overstimulated, we can't prioritize what we need to do at what time. And so then that's what gets more frustrating to people. They're like, oh, I know I should do this, but then I don't do it because I got all these
Because they're still intaking all that other information. That's what I tell people. Like, we might walk into a room and notice 5 things. Drayson will walk into a room, and even though he doesn't say it, he's probably noticed like 20 things. Right. And so he just it's just like sensory overload for him. So, so I think the intake is still there. I just don't think it bothers him as much. Right. Or, something to that effect is kind of what I'm noticing. Right. And kids like with ADHD, ADD, I'm not diagnosing or anything like that, but a lot of those kids too have they see more than what we think they see. Yeah. Their intake of stimuli. And so if you can minimize that or, alleviate some of that in any way, then you're helping that situation in any way. And kind of opens up those other doors. Right. Yeah. And it's funny because I know we talk about CBD being more maybe sedating versus, stimulating, but really when you think about it, you're calming other systems. Right. And now it's almost like your brain's kind of maybe getting stimulated in a different way. Right. Right. At least that's what I've kind of noticed with Drayson. So, which it's been really fascinating. I had a client, and she described it as it was like her brain finally went, oh, like I can like be my brain, not having to focus on all of these, 10,000 things going on around me. I could like focus on just what, being creative, having the stimuli that they wanted to have. Right. And so whatever that could be for each individual, if it's creativity, their business, whatever. Yeah, whatever it looks like, so they can actually get to that. And so when she just kind of was like that, moment, in her life. She's like, and so you are chill at that because you're kind of in your zone. Like that's where you want to be. Yeah. I've noticed it too, just personally. Like there's certain things that normally I feel like, well, would I overreact to this, or would I have more of a reaction where I'm like, oh, it doesn't bother me as much. Now my family still might beg to differ on that, but I at least I feel like I've noticed a few things here and there, like things that I normally would really bother me to the point of saying something. There's some things that I'm just like, oh, okay, like it's just a little bit more calming for me. Right. Yeah. And I use it for different purposes, not just because I'm an anxious mother, but because of my autoimmune as well. And I have found that it's been really beneficial for me. Awesome. So let me ask you a little bit about like maybe some discrepancies in talking about CBD administration, dosages, forms that you had mentioned, I think in part 1 about how sublingual is usually the best straight into the bloodstream, but how does one go about maybe looking into dosages and forms of taking CBD? Okay. And again, it's not a one size fits all. So I always go with the low and slow method. Okay. And so, if a dose, let's say you have a tincture that is 500 milligrams, I would tell people to go low and slow with that. So they might start out with X amount of drops on day 1, and they do that for several days, and they see how their body feels. Okay.
And so a lot of learning with CBD, in my opinion, this is my opinion only, but is you're learning what your body's trying to tell you.
Yeah,
And so
right.
you have to start paying attention to what the body's saying to you, because the body will tell you everything it needs to know.
Yeah, and that gets worse when you're older, when you get older too, by the way.
Right. And right. And we've been conditioned as a culture
Right.
to find external validation of what our
Right.
body's telling us.
Right.
And sometimes that is needed. So please do not take that the wrong way. So it is needed at times, but there are sometimes when we have to listen to our
Right.
body, because our body will tell us. So if you're hungry and you go to the refrigerator and you're like, hey, I want this, your body's probably telling you need the nutrient in that food. Like it automatically knows
Right.
that. Same thing with CBD. So when you're taking it, you begin by taking a certain amount in the morning and at night, and you continue to take that. And then there may, like some days, like for me, if I know like I'm doing something that might put me out of my comfort zone, I might take a little bit more, because my body's like, hey, you might need a little bit more today. So I may take a little bit more. I may take a few more drops. Or if maybe I know I'm not going to have, the sleep I need or whatever, because I'm traveling or whatnot. Right. So you know what your body needs, and the body will tell you. So I always tell people to go, start out low and slow. And the quality of the oil and tincture is super important.
Okay.
Like, because if you go to department store or the convenience store or big box store and you get something off the shelf, just because on the label it says it has X amount of milligrams of CBD in it, you have to look at all the other stuff that's
Right,
put
that's
into
in
it
there.
too.
Right.
That can counteract it. So sometimes there's chemicals put into it. Sometimes there's other oils that are not great carrier oils, which I don't understand that. If you have hemp oil, why would you not put it in a hemp oil? Like, why would you put it in another carrier oil? Like, there's logical things like that,
Right.
like people that we just don't think about. Sometimes there's dyes put in it, which especially for overstimulation is terrible, like,
Right.
so watch out for dyes. And then, like just the way it's processed.
Right.
So the way it's extracted or where the plant is even grown. So
Okay.
I'm a firm believer that you need to have the crops here in the U.S. because they're regulated in a way that is a little bit different. Europe is a little bit different exception, but if it comes from anywhere else in the world, I'm going to question it.
Right.
So if your thing says made somewhere else than the U.S., I'm going to question that crop and
Right.
its production and how it was treated
Okay.
chemically or
Okay.
not chemically, or the
Right.
ground or whatever, because there's a precise way that it has to be done. And so when you go down the worm, the rabbit hole of this, you kind of
Yeah.
learn all those things. So
Because it's not FDA regulated.
it is not
okay.
FDA regulated,
Okay.
but the crops are. Like,
Right.
at least with the products that I use, I know the crops are.
Right.
So that was the wormhole that I went down, and I was able to find a company that I went to dispensaries, I went to all the, big box stores, I went to all these places, I read the labels, and if I couldn't read past like the first two ingredients, I wasn't going to pick it up and put it in my body.
Right.
But if I couldn't if half of them don't even have CBD oil on the ingredients, which is
Right.
appalling to
Doesn't
me that
make
you would
sense.
think you would buy it.
Right.
And people don't look. And I have people bring me stuff, well, this is what I've been using and it's not working on it. And I'm like, well, it doesn't even have CBD oil in it. Like
Yeah, and they think they're taking a CBD.
yeah, because that's what it says.
Right.
And it may be derived from the hemp plant, but it's not really. They haven't extracted the cannabinoids correctly, so they're
Right.
not getting the benefits. So they're really wasting
Yeah.
their money. So looking at where it's produced, the quality of it, it should be kind of a green color.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be clear, because that means
Right.
it's probably had some type of chemical to strip it out. And so like there's those types of things like to look at for quality of oil that
And are there
make-
different like dilutions or
there's
that?
different milligrams, kind of
Okay.
like medication. So like with the product that I use, one of the things I wanted to be able to see the data sheets.
Right.
And so I was able to figure out with certain companies I wasn't going to, and I asked like 7 companies to send me data sheets and none of them did.
Right.
And so for a researcher, I was like, yeah, why would I take your product if you're not going to send me the data sheet? Or they would send me a data sheet of their whole company.
Right.
And it not like the crop or the batch or anything like that. So when I was looking for the oil that I was going to use, that was an important thing, is I wanted to be able to see mold counts and those types of things,
Right.
which I know for most of the listeners are going to be like, what the heck? But for me, it meant something.
Right.
And so I wanted to have that information. And I was able to finally find a product that I could get that information on what I was taking, on every bottle that I was taking. So that was super important to me, because then I knew the chain of how that went from the ground to my mouth.
Right.
And so that was important. And so we don't think about that when we take supplements.
Right.
And so, for some people that may be too extreme, or, why do I have to do that? But if you're going to pay for something that you're using to heal yourself, then you want the quality of product. And so most products are not going to have maybe one of those components. And if you don't have all of them, I wouldn't recommend the product.
Recommend doing it then.
Yeah. I would it's better to not take it, honestly, than to take something that's subpar.
Right.
Because even though you might get a little, micronutrient of it, you're not going to get the full benefit of it, and you're just wasting your money.
Right.
Yeah,
I say that too a lot about supplements. You have to know, if you're taking nutritional supplements, what's on the label, and is it a certifiable product, and all of that, and it can be mind-boggling, because there's a lot of stuff that's not FDA regulated, but the some of the nutraceutical companies, it's up to them that they have to follow that compliance standard. So it's it's kind of this intricate side game that you don't even know is happening, just to get your product in hand, you know, which is always a little bit interesting to me. So tell me a little bit about, and because I had, you to mentor me about the best type of CBD to get, and that type. And I will, just for our listeners listening in today, I will be posting Rachel's information in the show notes, so that if you do have questions about CBD, you can reach out to her and go ahead and pick her brain, as I have done several times before, before even this conversation. But I wanted to ask you, what do you feel is maybe an appropriate age for a child to start CBD?
Well, I'm going to go back to the previous episode.
Okay.
When mothers begin nursing, when they have newborns, we automatically produce CBD in our milk.
Okay.
And so I'm just going to leave that question there.
Okay.
Because there's no research, there's no data to say where. But if I'm already giving it to my child, because it's naturally being passed, then you can make the determination from there when you want to start it. But
what she's trying to say is, read between the lines, folks. Read between the lines.
Yeah.
Well, and just to share a little bit too, I know I mentioned this in the first part one as well, but we tried it with Drayson when he was, I think, around 5 years old, and he was like around the age of 5 or 6, and we used it for several months. We didn't notice a huge change or anything. He still seemed a little overstimulated, but now that he's a little bit older, he's 11, almost 12, and he's starting to enter that preteen. I'm so excited phase. Like,
the joy.
Where's the CBD? Quick, I need some now.
Yeah.
But we're starting to kind of enter that phase, and so we decided a couple months ago. I reached out to you and said, listen, I really want to explore this again. And now I'm seeing more things unlock for him now than I did when he was, per se, let's say at the age of 5, when we tried it the first time. So, and one thing that you told me that I think it's important for our listeners to understand was, you told me from the beginning, it could take a couple days, it could take months until you notice a difference, right? And so you do notice that varies for all sorts of people across the board?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
So, I mean, most people will notice something initially within a few weeks. They might notice that they are not as edgy with their family, or they sleep better, or they have, less leg cramps, whatever it could be. It could be everything. I mean, it could be anything. I'm not using diagnoses here, but it could be anything. But most people will notice at least a decrease in the negative of those, of something that's going on. And then it's only usually a little bit, let's say maybe 10%. Okay. But they notice it's subtle, but those people are paying attention.
Right.
So I'm going to reiterate that. They're paying attention to their body. So if you're not seeing anything, I always ask people, are you paying attention to your body?
Right.
Because if you're not even going to see the subtle things. So when you get to the big things, they're not going to be big things. They're going to just be subtle things to you. And so learning to pay attention to their body. And that's, for me, that's one thing that I love when I talk to people and consult them on that, because that's the way I do it. Because this is not something I'm just going to send you off and say, hey, good luck.
Right.
You have, and you need to have some direction in it and some consistency with it, so that you can get the best benefit out of it. Because I don't want people that I recommend the products to, or to use CBD in any way, and then they come back and say, oh, it didn't work.
Right.
To me, that's like the biggest, I'm like, why? I'm going to ask you why it didn't work, because there's probably, even with Drayson, there might have been a medication that he was on that was like maybe not really working well, or it could have been that he didn't take it. I'm not saying any of these things are like what happened, but it could be not taking it correctly. We're not taking it consistently. That's 99% of the time. That's what it is. Because people, oh, well, I feel good, so why did I take it? Why not? Well, you got to keep taking it. It's a supplement. Would you stop taking your vitamin C?
Right.
Or your like those, they won't stop taking those, but then they'll stop taking the CBD. So like the logic there, listeners, doesn't make sense to me, but do what you want to do. But that's usually, I'll start asking those questions, and that's where we'll dig out that information to go, why is it? And maybe you need to up the dose.
Well, and I look at it as a fuel source too. Like if I'm intaking certain foods for my body, like this is just another intake of something.
Yes.
So does it, and it's not like, like they say with fat soluble vitamins, you have to be careful not to take too much because you can develop a toxicity. Water soluble vitamins, not necessarily.
Right.
I always like to joke around that, Americans have some of the most expensive urine in the world.
We do.
But you go ahead and just, you excrete it. Is there any concern over that with CBD? Looking at it from a supplementation standpoint, is there anything to be concerned about in terms of toxicity or anything like that?
Toxicity wise, no, because if you're taking it sublingually, it's going right into your bloodstream anyways. A lot of like what you're talking about with fat soluble and water soluble, all that stuff, it's hitting the digestive juices. And so that's where you're going to have some of the interactions. There are,
which makes sense. Yeah.
I caution when I say this, and so please consult your doctor on this, because there are a few heart medications that are designed to slow the heart rate down. And so with your nervous system relaxing, your blood pressure oftentimes will relax, and your pulse rate will relax. So those things can be affected. So if you're one of those people that maybe is on the lower end of that, you might need to pay attention to that. I'm one of those people. So there's times where not that I'm on a medication, but I have certain things that my body does. So I have to pay attention to that, because if it does, I know what that feeling is. My body will go, hey, wait a second. And so maybe for the next couple of days, I don't take quite as much, because I know my body doesn't need it.
Right.
I'm listening to what my body's telling me to do, but there are a couple of, but as far as toxicity, I don't know if
nothing's ever come out.
And I would know more on if you're taking the other stuff, you might have that issue, but not, I've never experienced it. I can't say that it doesn't happen, but I've never experienced it with all the stuff I've done and looked at.
I was just curious. That definitely has not happened to us either, but that kind of leads me into my next question, because you just vaguely touched on it. But do you think it's important that somebody that is interested in maybe starting CBD, that they still continue to work with their healthcare provider or their healthcare team?
Absolutely. Okay. And the reason why, it's a twofold reason. One, because there are some things that you need to stay on medically. Yeah. You just are. And that's up for your doctor and you to determine what those things are. But there are some things too, like we said, you'll notice a decrease in those medications. So it could be, various different types of medications that you may take on more of an as needed basis that you see you don't need to take as needed. You don't need them. And so when you're doing that, you have to be sure with your physician that's, that it's okay. And I know of one study that they're doing right now with opioids. And so that's a very interesting study that you can go out and research how they're looking at how this may help with opioid addictions. And I think that's, really cool. There may be an alternative to, some of the therapies that we've had with that addiction over the years. And so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but that's still a medical thing that needs to be medically directed, you know. So if anybody needs to look and work with their physician on it. Secondly, the more you're knowledgeable of it, then the more you can work with your doctor on that, because a lot of physicians are not.
Right.
Like, they know of it, and depending on their viewpoint, they may go for it and they may not go for it. And that, I mean, that's their choice as a medical practitioner. But you're going to find that if you're your advocate for your health, the doctor's not the advocate for your health. They're there to tell you what's acutely wrong, how to fix it from their viewpoint, and then go from that place.
Right.
And so when we work with them, if you're advocating for yourself, you could say, hey, that's what I had to do with mine, is I didn't want to stay on all that stuff because, they were going to give it to me. They were going to keep giving me the prescriptions every time I went and saw them. And rightly so, because that's their job. And so when I was like, hey, I don't need this as much. I'm only taking it maybe like once a week. Why do I need to keep taking it? And it was, you know, me knowing medications, I was like, I'm taking like 3 things for the same thing. Why do I need 3 medications for the same problem?
Right.
And so I was able to start taking them away, but I had to also be cautious because there were some medications that I was taking that those things, if I took them away too quickly, they could have affected them.
Right.
So that working with a doctor, but advocating the fact that, hey, I'm taking this supplement and it's helping. I'm not having to take this as much, you know. Like one of my physicians, she was just kind of like, well, we don't need it anymore.
Right.
Keep taking what you're taking, and we'll see, you know, if you do need it, you can go get the script. But if you don't, just, you know, she was more of a listen to your body type physician. So I was very lucky with that. But, you know, working with our medical professionals, and if we do it in a way of co-creating, instead of like I'm right or he's right or she's right and I'm wrong, whatever. If we go into it from that vantage point that we're helping, trying to be on the forefront of finding maybe alternatives for these spaces. And, you know, if that doctor doesn't agree with you and you don't like it, you can have the choice of finding a new one.
Right.
You know, that's all. And I had to do that several times. I had to go to different doctors.
And it's so funny too, because when you mentioned about advocating for your health, like I think too, sometimes as a parent, that's difficult to advocate for your child's health.
Right.
And try to explain to them the things that you're noticing. And it's like, they're in the room with them for 5 minutes and they're like, here, take this.
Right.
And it's like, you know, okay, but I want it to be more than that.
Right.
And I realize in the healthcare system, you know, that's part of the nature of the beast.
Right, it is.
So it's like, you know, you do feel, at least I have felt this way as a parent, like your hands are tied a little bit, trying to decipher what's best for me to decide what's best for Drayson.
Right.
That's been hard for me sometimes because, like, you know, he has a psychiatrist and I don't know how she's going to react when I tell her, you know, we cut back his, you know, medication. She told me I could, and I implemented CBD, and this is what we're doing now.
Right.
You know, what is that conversation going to look like?
Right.
And so that's something that we're kind of going down that rabbit hole right now as we speak.
Right.
You know, and because some of the medications that Drayson are on, it's like, it's not necessarily great for him to be on them so long term, and he's so young. He's only 11.
Right.
So that's the other concern that I have. And so that's why I kind of started looking into some of these other, you know, modalities. So, well, and I have to tell you, you know, again, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's been, you know, we always have such a good time. In fact, Rachel and I never ever run out of things to talk about ever.
We never
and
do.
But I, you know, I appreciate you as a friend and as a colleague, and thank you so much for everything. And like I said, I'm going to post Rachel's information in the show notes so that if you do have specific questions about CBD or maybe looking for a resource, Rachel would be a great person to help point you in the right direction or give you some of the education that you do seek. This concludes our episode for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have a question, comment, or even a show topic that you would like to hear about, please go ahead and send me an email at info@piecesformypuzzle.com. I would love to hear from you. And feel free to give us a good rating on your preferred podcast platform of choice if you haven't done so already. And you can also like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Pieces for My Puzzle. And like I said, this concludes our episode for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, keep working on your puzzle. And remember, you don't have to have it all solved in a day. Take care.